And I also do a lot of the salsa onboardings. And one of the questions that we get asked a lot of the time is, how can I make the quality of my salsa captures better? Which is fair enough. And we can. It's very simple. I'm going to take you through kind of some simple steps during this presentation to tell you how you can do just that. So I'm really excited to be able to take you through that. Now, obviously, another question that gets thrown around a lot is, do I have to use additional lighting? We will cover that a little bit. But I'm going to tell you right now off the bat, I have never used additional lighting with my salsa booth, actually. It's something that I have never done. So, but we will cover that. Okay, guys. So first thing that I'm going to say to you is practice makes perfect. So it is possible to get good quality captures from your iPad photo booth. And although it's not the same as a DSLR, it's not. A DSLR photo booth is very different to an iPad photo booth. And we really shouldn't be comparing like chalk and cheese, because they are two very, very different experiences. But when it comes to working with any camera, whether that is a DSLR or an iPad camera, and I'm sure Kat will go through some DSLR stuff in more detail shortly, it just takes a little bit of time and practice, as well as a willingness to actually learn the basics of photography, to create those beautiful, consistent captures every single time. And that is exactly what we are going to go through now. So taking a good capture on an iPad camera, regardless of what photo booth you might be using. Obviously, I'm going to show you how to do this with salsa today. It's down to a few different things. So, and if you can get these right each time, you are going to make for some great photos and captures. So placement is the first one. Where we position our booth is so important, and also where we position the users too. Don't forget about those people using the booth. Framing, how are we going to set up each and every shot that we frame? Exposure, allowing the perfect amount of light to come into the camera to ensure that the quality is good and consistent every single time. And then also the white balance as well. So the white balance is going to control our temperature and the tint of our captures, and again create that consistent look so that your gallery looks beautiful every single time. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, guys, auto is not your friend. Auto may be easy, but it's definitely not your friend. And if you can move away from auto into manual, it is going to be way better for you. So when you are using the camera settings of your iPad, we're going to try and switch off auto on the salsa, because it's not going to give you the consistency you're after. And in fact, every different output, every different capture is going to look different each time. So the only real way to get good consistency and quality is to actually be able to manually control all of these settings. So before I kind of jump into the Salsa app, which I hope will work because I'm going to try and share my screen for my app for you guys, I just want to look very, very briefly at the camera settings and provide you with a little overview of how the iPad camera works so that you can understand which settings to adjust and when. So for most photography, it's really crucial that you guys have a basic understanding of what is called the exposure triangle. Now, the exposure triangle is actually made up of a couple of things: shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. And understanding how these things work together will make you a much smarter photographer and also a much more efficient iPad booth user as well. So let's just go over the shutter speed real quick. So the shutter speed, or as it's known actually on the Salsa app, is exposure time. It determines how long the lens stays open for. So a faster shutter speed, like 1/1000th of a second, is going to give you almost like a freeze capture effect. So it's going to shut really fast. So if you go for a slower shutter speed, for an exposure time like 1/60th over a second, you're going to have a little bit more motion blur, but it will actually let some more light in. So we can control that exposure time on the iPad. Now, we also can control the ISO on our iPad as well. And in the case of a digital camera like we have in the iPad, the ISO is actually a measurement that determines like how sensitive that digital sensor in the camera is to light. So Increasing your ISO is going to allow you to work with less light. However, if you do increase the ISO, you may find that there is more noise or graininess and less details in your capture. So you can kind of see this on this slide here. So you can see the one on the left has got a lower ISO and the one on the right has got a higher one. And you can see the difference between the quality of those two images. So increasing the ISO will bring light into dark images, but can diminish the quality. A lower ISO means the noise or graininess will remain less obvious. So we kind of want to try and get as low ISO as possible every time that we are running the booth. Your ISO is actually dependent on your surrounding environment and light conditions as well. So if you are in a low light setting, you will actually need to have a higher ISO to properly expose your captures. Whereas in a very, very bright setting or environment, a lower ISO would actually kind of avoid having too much noise in your captures and will actually enhance the detail as well. Now, Aperture is something that we actually can't control at all on the iPad, but it is still quite important to understand what it does so that we can kind of get to grips with the exposure triangle. And again, I'm sure that Kat will mention this on her DSLR talk in just a second, but the aperture essentially, it affects the depth of field of a photo. So when you see photos where the foreground is sharp and the background is slightly blurry, then that is actually down to the aperture settings. So an aperture is measured in these little small increments called f-stops. So the bigger the number, the narrower the aperture on the opening of the camera, and the lower the number, the wider the aperture. So you can kind of see that on my, try to pull out some diagrams for you guys so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So a narrow aperture will mean that the depth of field is kind of more sharp, and a wider one is going to result in kind of less background detail. So that's kind of the best way of describing that. But like I said, we cannot control the aperture on our iPad, but really important for you guys to know that when it comes to learning about the exposure triangle. So now that we have this basic understanding of photography, how can we start setting up our salsa booths to create the best captures for our users? The first thing is going to be the booth placement. So salsa wasn't actually designed to be placed a million miles away from your backdrop. In fact, the optimum positioning from the backdrop is actually about 3 to 4 feet. So making sure it's no more than 3 to 4 feet away from the backdrop is going to allow you to get the most out of that beautiful LED light that we have on the salsa booth. If you're setting up your salsa booth like 6 or 7 feet from your backdrop and you're wondering why your photos are so dark, then positioning is probably going to be the first problem that you need to sort out. Is that putting it that far back is going to cause more problems than you need. Positioning our users as well is equally as important as where we position the booth. We need to find that sweet spot. So the sweet spot where our users can stand so that the capture is bright enough and that also that we don't cast a ton of shadows on our backdrops as well. So if you position users right up to the backdrops, if they kind of go right back, you're going to get a lot of shadow, which is something that we kind of see a lot of. A lot of people ask how they can avoid those shadows. It doesn't help because I don't know if you guys find this, but when you're doing events, people like really gravitate towards the background. They do their thing on the booth, they get what they want to do, and then they jump right back to the backdrop. That is not helpful because we want them to stay kind of perfectly in between backdrop and the salsa booth. So to try and get them to avoid this, my top tip would be for you to find that sweet spot wherever you set up and take down almost like a horseshoe area that is going to show them where they need to stand, because people cannot be trusted to stand where you want them to stand. Give them some kind of guidance. And if you have an attendant there, then that attendant can also kind of guide them into the correct position there as well, which is kind of cool. Let me get my next slide up, guys. Here we go. We also do have to kind of look at the framing as well. So the framing and the positioning, they all work together. Obviously, placement has an impact on framing and framing has an impact on placement. So you just need to make sure that they work together. Obviously, we want to make sure that people are standing like in the middle of the photo and not off to one side. Also, make sure that your light is kind of as front on as you can possibly get it. If you're using that salsa booth, you can actually adjust the tilt of the head, so we don't want to have shadows coming at us in kind of weird angles either. So we want to make sure that people are positioned properly and in the right place. Another big part of the framing is also down to our camera ratio selection. So the camera ratio is a really important thing for you guys to kind of make sure that you know about when you are running the Salsa app. You need to select the correct camera ratio on the iPad, and that will probably be determined by what overlay you're using or what photo template you have designed up. So if you've been using the Salsa overlay and the Salsa template editor, you will probably have to see that when you select a layout, you can choose them based on whether they're portrait, whether they're landscape, or whether they're square. So if you have selected portrait, then when it comes to setting up the camera settings on your iPad, you are going to need to select the portrait camera ratio. Like same goes for all of them. So if you go for square, you're going to have to select that square ratio on your camera settings. Now, you cannot adjust the rate. Once you set that ratio on your iPad, you can't change it in between shots. So you just need to make sure it's consistent over all designs, because that one ratio is set for your entire event. So if you have designed up a template which has got portrait photo holders, but you've designed up an overlay with which is a square layout, your camera is going to get really confused. It's going to squish in your overlays as well. So you just need to make sure that it is all consistent. I will show you that on the camera settings in just a second. Also, just so you know, guys, if you go landscape, one of the things on Salsa is because you can't really get a landscape ratio, a true landscape ratio on an iPad camera, you kind of have to crop in the landscape a little bit. So landscapes layouts generally lead to slightly lower resolution as well. So just bear that in mind. So obviously, when it comes to positioning, if you are doing that correct kind of 3 to 4 feet, then obviously that crop as well is going to depend on where you place your users. So obviously that kind of narrow portrait crop, you are going to be limited to how many people you can get into the booth. So just bear that in mind as well. We also need to kind of tackle exposure here, guys. So we have to work with the available light that we have. And that will change from event to event. No event can guarantee the same light conditions. From when you test to when you go to an event, that is going to change. So it is up to you guys to practice so that when you get to an event and maybe you have highlight or low light, you know what you're doing with your camera settings. So the usual available light that we have to work with is going to be our beautiful Salsa LED lights, our ISO, and the exposure time setting on the camera. So I'm going to jump onto, hopefully, if it all works, I'm going to jump onto my iPad screen now. And so I'm going to try and switch. This is all very technical. I'm going to try and see if I can switch over to my iPad. So just bear with me 1 second, guys, and see if we can get this up. Is that working? Hopefully it is. Perfect. I'm sure that's right. I'm also going to just hide myself because you're going to see you're going to see me on the iPad in just a second as well. Okay, guys. So here is our amazing iPad. So I'm just going to run through an event for you guys. We're going to go into the settings first. That's the cog on the top here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to camera settings on that sidebar here. Okay, guys. So right now, it's really bright, like so bright. You can see that I have a lot of what is called clipping around my face, where it's like literally so overexposed. Not great. So we can sort that out. First of all, I'm actually just going to reduce my flash brightness down a little bit. That's going to help quite a lot. There we go. Less intense now. So let me just take you through all these settings. So we have the aspect ratio at the top here. That is what I was talking about choosing your aspect ratio. So you can see straight away you have auto, portrait, landscape, square, 2x3 and 3x2. Now, if you are printing, you need to use portrait or landscape. The 2x3 or 3x2 are really designed for social sharing only. So I would stick, if you're going to print, to portrait or landscape. Remember, auto is not your friend, so please try and avoid auto at all times. So I've got a portrait camera ratio right now. I think you guys can still see me, which is awesome. Obviously, we're going to be using our front camera. Do not use the back camera of Salsa because it will not show you anything. We also want to have mirroring on. People generally tend to prefer mirroring. I can't even say it, mirroring. So leave that one on. Let's tackle exposure first. We'll come back to white balance in just a second. So let's jump into our exposure. Right now, if I turn that on auto, again, we're not going to do auto, but this is kind of what we have on auto, but this will change each time. We're going to turn that off right now, and we're going to adjust this so we get a really nice clean capture. So at the moment, I've got my exposure time set to 1/60, so a fairly slow shutter speed. I actually quite like 160 as a shutter speed, so I'm going to leave it like that. And what I'm going to do is adjust my ISO. So that's really high right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drag that a little lower. And what you'll be able to see in just a second, hopefully, is that things start to clear up. You can see now that I've got, it's way less bright, and actually the clarity has got much better all of a sudden. It's still not really bright enough for what I want. I could increase that ISO. I could also increase that shutter speed as well. So if I was to go up like a notch, it's going to adjust it a little bit. But I want to try and keep that shutter speed around the 160 mark. I'm actually going to drop the ISO down to 0 right now. And they're going to jump out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my flash brightness. So I'm going to drag this up a little bit more. And now you can see that my flash is going to time out as well, guys. So I might go into darkness in just a second, but there you go. So I have now a really nice photo with high quality. Yeah, it's looking good. I mean, I'm happy with that. I'm sure that you guys would be happy with that too. And I don't have any additional lighting. I'm literally standing. This is 3 to 4 feet from my booth. I'm in the middle between my backdrop and my booth. Oh, it's gone off. Sorry, guys. It's gone down to cool down. We don't want to burn those LEDs out. And I have a great capture when it's running. So let's go ahead and start this event and see what it looks like. So I'm going to press start here, take a photo. Here we go, guys. I'm back again. I'm going to take this one. There we go. Nice, clear, quality photo, very easily with the salsa. So let me jump back in here, guys, and just jump back into my my other presentation. I'm just going to go over very quickly when we need to have additional lighting, because obviously that is another thing that gets asked a lot. I hope you guys can see this again now. So there's a lot of jumping around. There we go. Okay, guys. So the last thing I want to cover very quickly is additional lighting. So a lot of people want to know whether they should buy additional lights for salsa. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, I've never actually used any additional lighting. I actually work with the light that I have available and set up the booth accordingly. I've never had the booth set up more than 3 to 4 feet away, either from the backdrop, which works really well for us. Obviously, it's the kind of style of photo booth that we're after, the photo booth experience that we're after. We don't like to take huge group shots with the salsa. We like to keep it really small at 2 to 3 people. So it completely depends on that kind of style that you are trying to achieve right there. So yeah, you're limited to smaller groups if you do that small, that's kind of setup with the salsa. But of course, you can push the salsa booth further back if you want to. You can also consider choosing which camera ratio is better for larger groups as well, if you want to do that. Obviously, portrait crops in, so it doesn't work well for large groups. Square is probably going to be one of the best ones for that. But you may decide that you want to have some additional lighting to help fill that kind of space behind them, especially if we're getting a lot of shadows from big groups. And we don't want to have any really big extreme shadows. So with any additional lighting, it's important to not put them right next to the booth. So I've put this example of where you need to put your lighting. So we are going to put the lighting actually fairly close to our users and actually kind of directed to the back of them, because we want to try and offset the bright front light of the salsa booth and fill in the backdrop and create that fill light for them to get a better quality photo. So that is how you're going to use additional lighting. But like I said, if you're not ready to kind of invest in additional lighting yet, you don't have to. Salsa does work really well if you do set it up in that kind of 3 to 4 feet distance away as well. So I see there's quite a few questions. So I think I'm good. Am I good to start doing questions, guys? I'm asking our moderators here. I literally have no idea how much time I have left on my presentation. Great. I can do the questions. Awesome. Okay, guys. What additional lighting do you recommend? Well, it's exactly the same one as Kat just suggested. It's I think Amanda's probably got a link that we can pop in in this question in a second, but it's the one I can't pronounce. So it is that one though. If you want to use that additional lighting, those is probably the best one. And also having those battery packs on is going to guarantee that that light stays on for as long as possible. Oh, white balance settings. You're right. I completely missed the white balance. That's a really good point. So just very quickly, the white balance is going to adjust the temperature and tint of your photo. So the way to use white balance is to look at the light around you, and you can actually adjust the temperature. So if you're in a venue and you've got some really yellow lights overhead, you can actually adjust this slider to make the white balance a little cooler in your photos to balance out that light and get a more natural look. So yeah, you're right. I did miss out the temperature and tint. But you know what, guys? I have a really exciting thing to mention, that actually in a few weeks' time, we're going to be doing some specialist camera setting onboardings as well. So you can always jump into that, and we can go over that all again if you want to. Do you find that you need to change your settings through the night? Nope. So if I was on auto, then you're going to get that consistency. But actually, if you're setting up at an event and it's, you know, dark, like most events are, as long as you've got it set up, that consistency is going to stay the way through if you have it done with your manual settings. So that is what I would suggest there. Why does the flash time out? Good question. The flash times out because the LEDs are really bright, and if you have it set to that kind of 100 flash brightness when you're testing your camera settings, we don't want to burn those LED lights out. So it's basically Salsa just preserving those lights for you, and so that's why they time out. I am only using the square size as mine is a complete digital booth and best for social media. Is that right? Yes, Amanda, that's great. Square is great for social media. Also, you can use 3x2 is really great for social media as well. That is also a preferred Instagram size. So definitely, if you wanted to add a little bit of variety, I would generally select that one as well. When would you recommend the additional lights ones? Hopefully I went over that, but if you are in a really, really, really dark venue, then that's a really great time to use those additional lights. But most of the time, you know, you could probably get away with just using the Salsa light. I mean, I do all the time. And you can get really good pictures from the Salsa LED light. For the framing, do I have to use GIFs so they can have 4 pictures in the template? Well, it's kind of a little bit off topic there, Christine, but just to help you out a little bit, so GIF is a completely different capture mode to your photos. So your template design actually lives in your photo settings. What I would really recommend, and I would love for you to do, is join me on onboarding so we can go over that for you in more detail. How many people max do you recommend in one shot? Again, it is totally up to you, but I only like to have a 3 or 4 max in a shot, especially if I'm set up that 3 to 4 feet distance. Plus, it does make for a better photo, I think. When you have a ton of people crammed into a photo, it just looks really messy. And actually, nowadays, people are after that kind of sleek, kind of gorgeous look. And especially the Kim Kardashian look that people are raving about. You do not see more than 3 or 4 people in a photo in that kind of booth experience. I think there was a couple more. When should you use Glam feature? When your client wants it, and then you can get them to pay you accordingly for it. If you have a group of, say, 6 people, would it make sense to change to a landscape setting? Sure, you can use landscape, but just bear in mind that the resolution is a little bit lower than if you were to use something like square or portrait. So again, totally up to you. Play around with it and see what you prefer. I do often use landscape sometimes, but yeah, the resolution just lowers a little bit with landscape. Sometimes when I use the LED lights, it flashes another color. Is that normal? I would like to maybe get you to speak to support about that, actually. I'm sure they can step in and help you guys with that one and troubleshoot that for you. How do you maintain consistent light during outdoor evening events? That is a great question. And actually, I'm pretty sure that Kat's going to cover that a little bit with her DSLR talk. But essentially, you will probably need to go in and slightly adjust your ISO or your flash or your shutter speed throughout the night to make sure that you kind of get a continual consistent look. So it just takes a little bit of extra work, but it's totally worth it. And there's always those little downtimes with the booth, so you can always just jump in and very quickly change that on your iPad. So yeah, that's a really great question, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for that one. Do you ever set up outside? Does the settings change at that point? Yes, I love setting up outside with the salsa booth. In fact, a few of the events I've just done, I know it's winter here, but we have done a few outside recently, and it's great. And again, it's just a case, like I mentioned before, just to go in and adjust those settings kind of every 15, 20, 30 minutes, depending on how quickly the light is changing. And also, please do not set up in direct sunlight. You don't want the booth to be facing direct sunlight, otherwise you're going to be in big trouble. What additional lighting do you recommend? I think I covered that one already. So yeah, I think maybe another couple of questions. How do I handle lighting for different skin tones? What's clear for darker skin? Guess typically looks very bad with lighter skin. Any tips? That is actually another really good question. And I guess it is kind of down to trying to find that sweet spot with the light, which makes everyone look good. So I guess that comes down to practice. Also looking at, you know, I'm just trying to think of the best way to kind of tackle that question. Actually, it is basically practice and just seeing what works best for everyone. Obviously, we kind of don't want to have we want to make sure the exposure is not so bright that you get clipping on everyone's faces. But once you get that sweet spot, it's going to look good on everybody. So practice is probably the best thing I can suggest there.